I've got a handful of releases that I want to get wrapped up in the next coming weeks. Henry Mallard talked about this Emil Bolio release he did when he was a kid on the podcast. And I've been in touch with him and Ron about reissuing that in its proper form, as it never really got done back then in the right way. So it's called In the Pale Moonlight. I've got the master, I've got artwork from Ron, and I've got liner notes. Really awesome liner notes from Ron, from Henry, and from Henry's mother, detailing the whole process. And it's going to be a really awesome special tape. Really, really hoping I can get that done in the next couple weeks. I've also got reissues of Vinyl and Heteronormative Musik from Trerixrosette, as well as Sex Regulaire. Also doing a CD version of this tape, Systems Endless Tunnel. Really excellent, crusty subterranean noise tape. Also a new sunk cost tape. Alright, hello, this is a new White Centipede Noise hybrid podcast / WCN TV episode. It's going to be a solo episode answering some of the questions that people ask in the comments or elsewhere and addressing some of the topics that get brought up on the podcast. Usually after I record a podcast episode, I'm not really able to participate in a lot of the conversation or answer a lot of the questions that come up afterwards. I really, really enjoy, the Tuesday after an episode airs or the week after an episode airs and reading people's thoughts about what was discussed on the podcast, what the artist had to say. That's really gratifying for me. It really makes it worthwhile to see that conversation is going further, that the ideas being espoused are provoking some sort of thought and discussion, whether it's agreement, disagreement, or otherwise. I don't give too much of my personal opinion on the podcast. This might be a chance for me to chime in my thoughts on certain topics that have come up. And also YouTube comments, people asking, what did you mean by this, or what was this at this point? I usually don't have the time to address them individually, but at some point I'll get to some of the stuff on special interests and some emails people have sent me with questions. So stick around and maybe something you've asked will be addressed. First comment here is an older one. Back on the podcast episode with Will, someone asked, "Hey Oscar, can you go into more detail about the feedback loops being boring? What specific sounds are interesting or uninteresting to you there?" Yeah, there's something about some of those kind of squirmy, really constricted synthy tones that come out of mixer feedback that just sound kind of amateurish and annoying, and they often escape into bleeping and blooping. There's also a really, really huge dynamic range, so they have this overly dynamic sound to them that's just out of control. Worth is an artist who uses exclusively mixer feedback and never on his recordings has sounds that go into this obnoxious amateurish territory. I think live it might happen to him once in a while, because live you really don't have the ability to control it as well or edit. So I think live maybe he has more takes more time to struggle into those sweet spots that he works in, but he really masters it. One thing I really think is interesting, and I know I'm not totally right on this, but I feel like a lot of the modular synth stuff that I hear produces a lot of sounds that are very, very similar to these squirmy, no input mixer feedback sounds. I don't know what that's about. I know that modular in itself doesn't mean any one particular sound, but there's something about some modules that people are using quite often that just has this kind of poppy, clicky, squirmy sound that I just don't like. Next one, someone asked the Aaron Dillaway episode, who is the artist mentioned at 1 hour, 14 and 55 seconds? Picture of the violin, didn't catch the full name. That's Mike Colino of Dog Lady, a great artist that I haven't listened to enough, but everything I have heard or seen from him has been very haunting and very special. So Dog Lady Island, Mike Colino. Someone wrote on the interview with Rose Actor Engel, who does Apologist and runs No Rent. She was talking about their kind of business model as a label. They release some really obscure stuff from a wide range of artists who maybe don't have the recognition or potential popularity, and they balance that out by releasing certain artists or releases they know will be very successful and sell right away. And this person asked, just out of curiosity, other than Jason, who is a guaranteed seller? No Rent is my main window to experimental music. I can't speak for them what a guaranteed seller is, but that is an interesting topic as a label. how you look at your roster, how you plan releases. I think a guaranteed seller can be different across different genres or labels, but I think if you're involved in this scene and buy this music, you notice that certain artists will be, selling out within a matter of days, whereas others won't. I think who you choose to release as a label says a lot about the integrity of your label. I personally am quite skeptical of labels who primarily release artists that fall under this guaranteed seller category. That'll always be kind of on whoever's the popular artist of the moment that is selling out, because to me that's kind of obvious that it's just following a trend and picking up on it for easy sales. I really, really respect artists like No Rent who do a mix. They do the artists that they know will be gone in a flash, but they also will release things that they know no one knows about and no one really cares about, but they like it. They think it's interesting. They think it's worthwhile. Maybe they have a personal relationship with the person and want to do something special for them. I think that's kind of the sign of a quality label. In my interview with Luke Tandy of Bean, we talked about noise forums and their importance. And someone wrote, "It never crossed my mind to join noise forums, but I'd love to. What are some forums worth checking out?" There's the Scream and Writhe forum. There's the Special Interest forum. And there is the White Centipede Noise Maniac Circle Discord server, which is a bit like a forum, kind of like a chat room. Those are the only ones I know of right now. There's an interview coming up soon with Gray of Hive Mind, Chondritic Sound, and Noise Extra. And we talk a lot about forums because he was behind the Tronics and Chondritic Soundboard, which was super, super instrumental for me and a lot of people coming together and sharing information, networking about noise. It was really an irreplaceable place for all this stuff. And I don't know if that's possible to do again. The centralized nature of it was really huge, in that you really had people from all sectors of noise, experimental, industrial, power electronics, all kind of cooperating and coexisting in this one space. You would have Toshiji Mikawa posting alongside some 12-year-old who just figured out no input mixer feedback. It was really diverse and really fun, and I'm sad it's gone, in the sense that I'm sad I can't look back at some of those texts now, because there was so much information there that's just basically gone. It seems now the scene is much more split and splintered. Most people are active in kind of showing themselves and lightly communicating on Instagram. Then there are the two noise forums I mentioned now, which are also kind of polarized. Special Interest seems to attract much more power electronics interested people more interested in the grittier edge of noise and industrial. And there are a lot of people who don't want to be on there at all and refuse to be and can't stand looking at it. Then there's the Scream and Writhe forum, which is a little bit more general noise oriented. There's a lot of really good stuff going on there, a lot of good activity, discussion, but a lot of that kind of grit from the Special Interest board is not present there, which I guess maybe that's how some people like it. They like those things to be able to pick and choose. I frequent both, and I think both are great. I think having them separate maybe isn't a bad idea, but I don't know. It would be nice to see kind of a unification. But either of those are worth checking out and signing up for, in my opinion. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I think noise forums are a very, very valuable and important channel for communication and documentation of noise culture, all of that, which isn't possible anywhere else. The White Centipede Noise Maniac Circle Discord is also great. Discord's a little bit like a forum mixed with a chat room, so we have less specific categories, but there's like a kind of running fluid chat in different areas. It's intimate. It's all people who kind of know each other, who have committed to supporting the podcast or been on the podcast and really are active in sharing ideas and sharing information. So that's really nice, but it's not open to the public, so that makes it different from the other two, which are, kind of open source resources for everyone. Another question. A guy on Patreon wrote me, any luck finding a translator for Japanese acts? And unfortunately not yet. I haven't really been looking. I haven't really followed up on that like I wanted to. I do have some contacts actually that people have sent me. I thank everyone who sent me a contact or a lead on that. I just haven't had the time to really follow that up in a serious way. Hopefully I will soon. Another person wrote, can we get a list every podcast of all the mentioned bands? It is often hard to keep up with references for me as I dive deep during episodes. Noise music is so hard to find sometimes, and not having a reference to what folks are name dropping is hard sometimes. I understand your frustration with that, but the time it would take me to put that list together, I just don't have. I'm kind of at my limit for how much I can spit out with each episode. So each little thing, extra thing is like impossible. I will say I'm on the Discord server quite a lot, and a bunch of other people who have been on the podcast are or watch the podcast. That's where a lot of that stuff can get quickly and easily discussed. People ask about this or that, and we shoot off messages really quick. Maybe there's someone out there who wants to be an intern and, help me with some of that kind of stuff. The typing, the data, the uploading, that would be a big help. But until then, you're just going to have to kind of figure it out, ask people. I try to put a lot of graphics in the new episodes, so hopefully it's clear enough. I got an interesting email a while back that I haven't had time to respond to, and I'll paraphrase, but you've been talking about how noise music could and should broaden its scope to other subjects, something I agree is fruitful. However, I wonder about the limits of what it can effectively express. One interesting discussion of the positive case came up in Noise Extra's discussion of Deathpile's GR. They said, correctly I think, that power electronics is a much more appropriate genre to dive into such subject matter, because it aims to be unpleasant. I do find some noise to express positive emotions, but it seems to be bound to some extent. What is your opinion on this? If you agree, have you given any thought to what these limits are? I have here and there tried to articulate some thoughts on that. For me, noise in itself, without the context, is like an empty vessel of sound, and it allows personal feelings, thoughts, inner workings to fill the sound, and it typically doesn't give a lot of pre-written information or context. That, I think, is maybe one of the main differences between noise and power electronics. Even power electronics without lyrics, there will usually be something in the content, in the artwork, that is focusing a certain emotion, idea, and I'm not just saying any sort of focused idea or content, but usually to do with transgression or power, we can say in a very broad sense. I don't want to sterilize or gentrify noise in any way and just make it about cool sounds and remove these corners of hate, ugliness, transgression, whatever it may be, that have existed in power electronics and some areas of noise. But I just can't really accept that those topics are the only topics that noise should cover. And maybe topics is the wrong way to look at it. I look at it much more like abstract painting or sculpture or a lot of other forms that are able to convey very complex feelings or ideas. So it's not that I don't think noise is violence or violent subject matter. The sound is violent, but I think that violence can be much, much more emotionally obscure, contextually obscure. I honestly think this idea of themed noise is very, very simple-minded. It seems to be just often superficially pairing something you've researched and read about and some sort of sounds that kind of go along with it and putting them together, where I think a painting or a novel that comes from your inner workings as a human is going to convey a very complex range of ideas and emotions that can't be filed into one category or another. Unless you're dealing with genre, if you're dealing with a horror film, then it's a horror film. But I think the best works of art don't follow a genre. And I know there's layers of genre here that I'm talking about, because I actually am talking about within the genre, the sound genre of noise, which I think I like to define fairly strictly. I'd like to really think of that as music that is made of noise in the scientific sense, whatever that may be. But within that sound framework, I think the content, I think it could just be more abstract and more complex. Not that it be more positive or happy or about certain different things, but that it just be more complex and abstract, but still intentional. That's the main difference, I think. I think there's a lot more room for exploration and expression of human and non-human content within the framework of what noise is sonically. And that also kind of segues to another topic which has come up on special interests about what I've sometimes said about wanting there to also be more sonic variety within the framework of harsh noise than there is. And I talked about this kind of with Pat Yankee on the Afterblast that we did, where I've sometimes felt like I've come to the limits of what I can do with my gear or what I want to do with my gear, and I get to thinking that I love the sounds that can be produced with contact mics, overdriven, distorted analog signals. They are beautiful and I will never tire of them, but the things that I enjoy about those sounds and what I classify then as harsh noise, as some sort of defined term, I can't imagine that there aren't a lot of more sounds that satisfy that same urge, and that could be equally powerful, more powerful textures or timbres in the palette that just simply aren't easily created by the tools that we use, so that's why they don't appear in the music. I kind of naively made some comments about, I'm using Max MSP or software to find new sounds, and it's not like I don't know that people have been doing that for 30 years. People who have explored noise and sound art have really done a lot with technology and different things, and to be honest, a lot of it isn't satisfying for me. But my point is that still there are a lot of things that we haven't come close to in harsh noise. Some perfectly simple examples would just be to take sounds from nature that certainly satisfy the cravings of harsh noise on a level at least equivalent to junk metal, for example. Junk metal is very ubiquitous in noise because you can find it, you can have a small piece in your apartment, you can put a contact mic on it, which you can buy from people, and you can play it through pedals and it'll sound great. And that's become kind of like the guitar of harsh noise. And this guy in Special Interest was kind of arguing, there's a limitless amount of timbres that you can get from a piece of junk metal, depending on how you mic it, contact mic, condenser mic, how you process that, etc., etc. Sure, there are an infinite amount of variations maybe that you can get from that source, but it's still going to reference that source. Some very simple examples off the top of my head without even getting abstract are sounds from nature. Let's think of the sound of a tree splitting. When you hear a tall tree cracking from foresting or from naturally falling over, you have this amazing, complex, loud, cracking sound that can maybe be somewhat simulated with some sort of pedals or electronic signal, but it has certain characteristics to it of itself that are very unique to it that we've never heard in harsh noise, but belongs just as much to the sound palette of harsh noise as junk metal. The thing with harsh noise is it's typically this violent sound extended and manipulated, sustained. So when it lasts only 5 seconds, you don't have the ability to really work with it. So I'm thinking, could the sound of a tree cracking be synthesized with some sort of complex sampler software that would take that sound and draw it out infinitely in a way that you could manipulate? Could an artist build a physical machine that would process and crack a huge supply of trees for 20 minutes or 10 minutes? Could artificial intelligence create a long sustained piece of sound made up of the violent sound of a tree cracking? I think all of these things would be very possible, more difficult than what we do with contact mics and pedals on a table, but very possible. And as far as I know, no one with the intent and focus of harsh noise has done anything like that. There may be people in the general sound art world that have done things like that. There may be people in the field of sound design for film or something like that. But there's a specific focus and fetishism of harsh noise that is very different from those other areas. Another simple example, stones. There is the really excellent compilation that came out on Verlautbarung called Stein. It's a compilation of like 20 different artists, double LP plus a 7-inch, who all made works themed around stones and or using stones as sound source there's not one track on that compilation that actually sounds like Stone's, a sound that we all know is very powerful, violent texture, avalanche. Nothing on that compilation sounds anything like it. Most tracks sound like contact mic on something, kind of scraping, or a tape recorder close to something, kind of rattling, if at all. Again, I think someone could build a machine that could amplify and sustain the sound of rocks breaking or scraping against each other. There's no harsh noise that exists that touches that sound. And I believe that's because, I don't want to say laziness, but I believe it's because the tools that we use really predetermine the outcome of the sound. And I'm really fascinated by the other way around, where the vision of the sound comes first, and then ways are found to achieve that. And those are some pretty simple-minded, uncreative examples from sounds in nature. I think there's a lot of sounds that belong to harsh noise that we haven't even thought of or heard just because the way to create them doesn't exist, or we haven't really figured it out. Which is why I think Sam McKinley's idea that the future of harsh noise might be controlled explosives is really interesting, because it goes outside of this two-channel left and right stereo experience that we have with harsh sound and brings it into a three-dimensional physical realm where the power of the sound and potentially the artistry of what could be done with the sound is on a different level. I'm not knocking anyone who's using guitar pedals and contact mics. I do that too, and I'll continue doing it. I love it. But I really don't like hearing that this is the cap of what harsh noise is. I think it's like the first step. Another thing that's been brought up on the special interest board in relation to the podcast, and it relates directly to what I'm doing right now, is the limitations of different formats for interviews, or in this case, discussion. Obviously, a written interview has the ability for someone to articulate their thoughts perhaps clearer and make sure that they're saying exactly what they want to say without excess, without missing something. A video or audio interview like this has the disadvantage that if someone isn't as articulate or prepared, they might not get to exactly what they're wanting to say or how they want to say it. And then that interview goes out, or that video goes out, and it exists in the world, and they regret it. I've had some people not want to come on the podcast for that reason. That is the reason I chose this format for the podcast, is because I think it offers an alternative to the hyper edited, curated, written version of your expression that we've known in the noise world for such a long time. I don't think that video or audio podcasts should replace that. I think they should coexist, because I know, for example, that what I've talked about here, I could probably articulate much clearer if I sat down and really typed it out, read it over several drafts. But I think the value is that it gives people the chance to be honest, direct, and spontaneous, and not overthink too much. I'm not someone who likes to hear my own voice, or likes to see myself on stage, or feels comfortable addressing a lot of people. So doing this podcast for me is kind of a counterintuitive thing. That's just something I've learned to kind of bury by doing this podcast. It comes. I don't really revisit my episodes that often. When I do, it's just how it goes. I'm rambling. I'm trying to express my ideas or ask questions in the best way I can. There's been some, critical comments about my interview style before, which, I can respect and understand that I talk over the guest, or I'm too wordy with my questions. I do think one part of that has to do with the fact that I'm usually doing an interview over a video feed through the internet, and that usually has like a 1 or 2 second delay, so it's hard to finish a question and not interrupt the guest when they start to answer. There's a lot of overcutting there that is largely due to the technological limitation, but so be it. That's just how it is. It's part of life, and it's something that you just have to face head on, or just stay in the shadows and not do anything. And I think lastly, one topic that I've really been trying to push awareness of lately is the importance of just scene support and showing up. In the both physical and economic sense, there have been a lot of shows going on this summer in the past several months, and I've heard from some people that some really amazing shows had really small turnouts. That can happen for a number of reasons, but I think, if you're a part of the noise scene and you're wanting to benefit from it, put your work out and have it received, I think you do have some sort of duty or responsibility to for one, to just, if there's a show going on in your town that you have interest in and that, people are participating in, just show your face there. It means a lot for everyone. And you can even look at that in a selfish way. If you're interested in really only in yourself and promoting what you do, you should still be doing it because you want those same people there to show up when you got something going on. And it goes the same way for financial support. There is such a small amount of money that circulates within the noise world, but the thing is, everyone involved needs money for what they do, and it costs money to do what we do. And I think being more aware of that and more willing and happy to financially support one another would benefit all of us. I think there's sometimes a strange reluctance or stinginess that some people have towards other artists or people active in the underground. It's like they'll moan about having to pay too much for things because they're used to things being either free or extremely cheap, whereas nothing right now ever is free or cheap. And we pay large amounts of money to strangers and big companies that we don't know for things that we need or want, which are often very temporary. But if you're buying a tape and you calculate in your head, oh, well, it costs this much, well, then he's making X amount off that tape. That's not right. I don't understand why that mentality exists. If an artist is putting their heart and soul into creating a piece of work, a piece of art, and a label's putting work into getting it done and putting money into putting it out in the world, why is it somehow improper that they would earn a few bucks off of it? Of course, I know each one of us has limited amount of funds, and noise tapes and records and all that getting more expensive means less money to go around from our own personal budgets. But I still compare that to how much money people are willing to spend on things where they don't have an option, and somehow the fact that they don't know the person seems to make a difference. Whereas, an expensive cocktail is accepted, expensive entry to a show by a professional band is accepted, but when it's a DIY band and no one's going to get any money from it anyway, then people have a problem when the price goes past $10 or something like that. There was a bunch of amazing artists from Texas going around playing a bunch of shows around the Midwest and East Coast, and I saw that the entry price for most of those shows was like $10. And I just think, man, that's so cheap to see 10 amazing noise artists play. Noise is something so special. Noise doesn't exist anywhere else. You get to see 10 amazing noise artists play, and from that $10, they're supposed to be able to get to the next city, buy gas, buy food. Why shouldn't people pay $50 to see Scathing, TEF, Total Sweetheart, etc.? To me, that's logical. That's the price that it should be. I would never expect to see 10 rock bands for $10. And I would love to treat something like an expense, like an expensive outing, like I do going to the bar. If I would know that, I'm going to give $50 to these guys, and everyone else in the room is going to give $50 to these guys, and they can each walk home with a couple $100. To me, that's a good thing. I would love to see that, and I would love to see more people want to see that. The thing that Aaron Dillaway said in the podcast that we did, he said the reason he thinks the noise scene kind of slumped in the late 2000s for a while is because it was a kind of catch up from the recession that happened, and where people didn't have the money for noise tapes anymore. They only had the money for booze and weed. I understand that, and I understand that when times get tough, we do have to cut costs, but it kind of makes me sad to think that a lot of people just see this as a kind of a hobby that when there's not an extra $5 or $10 laying around, just can be kind of thrown by the wayside. I would love to see it more prioritized as an essential part of our culture and our identity and what we do and love. Like I said, there's a small amount of money in this world going around. Most of us have day jobs and other streams of income to be able to support this love and this passion. That's maybe how it's always going to be, but spending money with each other, I think, should be done more gladly, more graciously. When you work in the service industry as a waiter or a bartender or a bar back or whatever, you make your money off tips. When you go out, you always hook people up really hard because you're like, yeah, you guys are doing the same thing I'm doing. I get it. I know how it is. The beauty of this is that none of us are doing it for money. However, we all need money. So being conscious of that fact that spending money on labels, on artists, on podcasts, etc., creates more freedom to create more in the future and keep things going. We vote for what we want to be out there with our dollars, and when you spend money in the noise world, those dollars go a long, long way, and it should be understood that they're needed. So that's it for now. I hope I've addressed some of the things people wanted to know about and followed up on some of the things that get discussed. I really appreciate everyone who watches, listens, and comments. I think discussion and participation is very, very important. Also, huge thanks to people who support this, everyone who's on the Patreon, everyone who orders from White Centipede Noise. I can't do this without your support, so please keep it up. If you're not supporting, please consider supporting now. And see you next time. Coming up soon, interview with Gray from Hive Mind, Chondritic Sound, and Noise Extra. And interview with Gaia Donadio from Anti-Child League.